Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dog Trainers Podcast. Thank you guys for listening. My name is Mariano, that's Brent. And before we start here, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to some of our awesome listeners because we've noticed we've been getting a lot of love in Portland, Oregon, Anchorage, Alaska, of course, beautiful Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio, as well as people abroad. We've got a lot of listeners in Canada, Australia, Germany, Ecuador, Panama. And we just want to thank you guys and let you know that we appreciate you and we're keeping up on you. And we hope that we're bringing you as much value as humanly possible. Now, for everyone else, if you want to reach out to us, you can do so by reaching out to us at Dog Trainers Podcast. That's all one word. That goes for Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as all major podcast platforms. With that, let's dive in. This is episode 25, dealing with clients when it comes to crate training. How you doing, bud?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing, Mariano?
Pretty good, pretty good. You want to set things off?
Yeah, let's set things off. Well, again, as Mariano said, guys, thank you guys for listening. And today we're talking about a really great topic because every time we deal with a younger dog trainer or someone who's asking us questions, we always run into obstacles around the concept of crate training. Now, we got so much love from our last episode dealing with clients with aggressive dogs. Like we literally have the most downloads of an episode in the shortest amount of time that we've ever gotten before. So someone is finding value on this. Someone is sharing it. If you guys haven't checked it out yet, go ahead and check it out. It's episode 24. So we decided to come back with a dealing with clients about crate training, right? Because as you know, as dog trainers, you guys know that sometimes you can get a lot of pushback. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to clients right away. Even though we know as professionals that crating your dog or confinement training your dog has huge value, that sometimes it's hard to explain to clients. So we're going to do our best to teach you guys kind of how we deal with this before, how we deal with it during, and how we deal with this after.
Yeah. Before we dive in, can I just say that I think you're absolutely right about that. So I have a friend, again, for those of you who may not know, I live in Arizona in like the Phoenix area, and it be hot as hell around here. So it's currently too hot to just take dogs outside. So when I want to work dogs and they're good enough, I take them inside, like Petco, Home Depot, stuff like that. So I end up going to the Petco a lot because I just work dogs there. Mm-hmm. And I know one of the trainers there is a real nice guy. And we were talking about this the other day. And I'm honestly kind of amazed how many people have a hard time with the crate. Like a lot of training tools, I get it. I get the reluctance of an e-collar. I get the reluctance of like a prong collar, a star mark. But a crate, even though I know there are some people out there, obviously, who take issue with it, I guess I just really underestimated the sheer amount of people that have a hard time with it. Maybe it's just me. But yeah, I mean, with that being said, we wanted to start talking about why people tend to feel bad, what that is. And just when it comes to dealing with clients, how can you go about getting them to understand that it's insanely beneficial for the dog in so many ways?
Yeah. And I think just as we approach anything that is emotionally controversial for clients, I think it's really important for us as dog trainers to have as much empathy and as much compassion for the situation that they're in. If we can't put ourselves in the owner's shoes, it's going to be really, really hard to connect. My dad's a physician, and I remember when I was a kid, I used to go help him at his office. And he always had a sign right above his computer where he worked, and the sign read, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Exactly, until they know how much you care. And so this has always kind of been a revolving mantra in my head. So when dealing with clients with really sensitive subjects, it's important for us to really dive into how people feel, why they feel that way, so that we can connect with it and help kind of guide them towards the right direction, because we know as trainers it's going to help benefit them and their dog's psychological states tremendously. All right. So let's go into it. Why do clients feel bad, Mariano?
I think, a big thing of why clients feel bad from my experience is they tend to think of it like it's jail. They tend to think of it like the dog sees it as a bad thing. And I've actually gotten a lot of calls about exactly this in like the past couple of days. So this has just been on my brain lately anyway. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of the words that they use are extremely telling. I think when we talk about any episode that we do when it comes to dealing with clients, I would really encourage people to pay attention to the words that clients use, like how they describe something. Mm-hmm. And so they'd be like, he was being bad, so I put him in his crate, or like, I feel bad because I feel like I just rescued him and I don't want him to feel like I'm abandoning him. I don't want him to feel like he's back in a kennel in a shelter and this and that. Mm-hmm. And so I've noticed that lately, what I've been getting a lot of is younger puppies, and the owners feel bad because naturally puppies, of course, want to be with you all the time. And so they'll whine.
True.
And they're like, well, he's sad. He misses me. I don't want him to feel like I don't love him. I don't want him to like have this estranged relationship with me.
Right. Right. 100%. Other things also that we see is a lot of times with dog owners, this may be their first puppy, right? Like I think one of my biggest audiences at my age and my profession, and also just being a millennial, are other millennials who this is their first dog as an adult, right? And also another thing that we see is a lot of people come from homes with yards with dogs, right? So many times we hear this story where you go, yeah, I had dogs when I was a kid. We had a yard, or we lived on a ranch, or we lived on a farm, or we just lived in the suburbs and the dog lived outside or had a dog run or whatever it was. And so sometimes they as a young person getting a dog for the first time, maybe starting a new family, we have this schematic in our head of like, dogs deserve space. Dogs deserve freedom. Dogs are happiest when they have a lot of room, because this is ultimately what we experienced when we were kids, right? So naturally, the thought of creating our dogs or isolating them in general doesn't make sense. And so it's our job as dog trainers to teach them how development works and how we can develop like long-term strategies to make it so that your dog can eventually have more freedom in the house. And so that we can kind of work closer and closer. Now, me specifically in LA, we deal with a lot of people who aren't from LA, who moved to LA from maybe the Midwest, the East Coast. And so I hear this story a lot. These dogs their dogs growing up had a lot of space. And so especially during COVID, we're getting a lot of people who now that they say, okay, now I have a lot of time, I'm going to get a puppy, but I want my puppy to have freedom, right? Because how else is my puppy going to learn to have freedom unless I give them freedom? This is what makes sense in their heads. And so we're starting to see this. And also what happens is in LA, we see that a lot of people live in apartments, condos, like they live in very, very close quarters to other people, right? I worked in West LA for 10 years, and then I actually live in the Valley. And even just over, like down the freeway a little bit, 20 minutes, we see a huge culture difference, right? People in West LA live in apartments. They have to walk their dogs to go poop and pee. In essence, they're more confined naturally versus people in the Valley. They have yards, and their dogs go on hikes and hiking trails regularly. So it's a little bit different lifestyle. However, there are places for crates in different stages of development, in different lifestyles that people live. And our job is to kind of explain that to them.
Yeah. And that's a big thing that interests me when it comes to crate training is the issues that can arise if you don't crate train a dog. And, when we were drafting up this episode, kind of like last time we talked about, like we love to draft things out and make sure that we can really maximize like value for people. So of course, puppies, I mean, what's a more prime candidate for crate training than a puppy for all the reasons that we'll get into. But also there are dogs with some more serious stuff going on. There are dogs who have like severe separation anxiety, dogs that can be reactive to strangers in the house, dogs that can be fighting with other dogs in the house. There's so many reasons why crate training is a hugely viable option, especially LA, because I lived in LA too. I'm from LA, I recently moved, but I totally agree with you that there are a ton of people that aren't from there. And there are also a ton of people that just by the nature of LA, people work hard, stuff is expensive, including rent, so on. So I found a lot of like roommate situations of, younger people, 2-3 people in like a 3-bedroom apartment. All of them younger people, all of them because they're younger, like totally believe in like, we should rescue dogs and save them, which is great. So they adopt the like quote unquote unadoptables, right? Like the big pity shepherd mix, the big, whatever mix.
Yeah. The one missing an eye, the one missing a leg.
Yeah. Right. But when we kind of get back into the whole, like why people feel bad, I find this a lot. People with rescue dogs, especially when it comes to crating and or correcting in any sort of form, they love to make up backstories for the dog that make excuses as to why they don't crate them. Oh, well, I adopted him. I don't want him to feel bad. I don't want to like hurt his, they have this idea of like, I need to shield this dog from any sort of negativity, including the crate. And I'm like, I can understand where you're coming from, except that your dog just went after your roommate, which is why you called me here today.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
And, and I'm like, you have to understand just how much benefit could come from crate training your dog, not just crating your dog, crate training your dog. And I think that, I want to hear you riff a little bit about like the difference there, because I think that that's a big failing in trainers that I notice a lot. Like trainers don't always have the words to explain the difference. It's like, you don't just put the dog away. There's so much more benefit to it. And there's so much more active work that you do to really gain from the crate.
Yeah. I think so. Crate training, like those dog trainers who have been doing this for a couple of years or a lot of years, there are things that we know the crate provides benefit. And I'll just do a little checklist, right? Sure. So we know that like in puppy raising, that crating is great for routine development, right? So what's the easiest way to teach a puppy the right behaviors is to control how much freedom that they have, right? So it's easier for me to teach a dog to eat all his food if I feed him in the crate. It's easier for me to teach a dog to chew on a bone and not get distracted if I feed him in the crate. It's easier for me to teach the dog to relax in a passive form if I crate him anytime after activities, right? Mm-hmm. So it's also easier for me to make sure my dog's not chewing or destroying anything if my dog is confined or crated, be it in a puppy pen, a crate, a laundry room, a kitchen, doesn't matter, right? But isolation in general is how we teach dogs to not develop bad habits, right? Every dog trainer agrees on this, right? Mm-hmm. However, we also know that there's different types of people out there, there's different types of personalities, there's different types of puppies who crate training or confinement work might be a little bit more difficult than others, right? Let's say for the rescue dog, for example. I hear this story a lot. I hear, as you mentioned, people might come up with embellished stories of rescues. They might say like, oh, the dog was caged in a rescue for 10 years, or he was in a kennel for, or not 10 years, like a year or 6 months. Or they'll say something like, the last owner would keep this dog in the crate all day, and I don't want to do that to this dog, right? And so an interesting thing just on that subject, if the dog has been in the crate all day since he was a puppy and you rescue that dog, that actually tells me that dog's actually really used to the crate.
Right.
And just on a separate note, I kind of blame those Sarah McLachlan videos, the ones that the
SPCA videos,
the one that was like in the eyes of an angel far away. I blame
the dog is like,
and he's just like panting in slow motion. So I kind of blame those because those do really leave an imprint on our brains. Because we see the sadness, or we see these dogs caged up or locked up in a kennel, and it does this emotional thing, right? And it's really easy to kind of relay our own, like empathize a little too much with those dogs in that scenario, which is a fucked up scenario. They're caged up in bad environments, but when you're in a crate in an air conditioned beautiful 1,000 square foot apartment with beautiful furniture and loving owners, it's a very different story.
Yeah. And and you touched on something actually that I'm glad you brought up, because it kind of jogged my memory to a really interesting point, because you're right. Those videos are sad, but it's the magic of editing. It's not that the dogs are sad, and like, of course, with like music and slow-mo and so, that's like, even when I watch the straight up movies, like I'm a big horror movie fan, and John Carpenter was like, yo, Halloween sucked until we put the piano sound on it. And then it was like the best horror movie ever, So I only bring that up to say, like we say it jokingly, but don't let owners feel bad because of that kind of thing. Those dogs were in messed up situations. In a loving home with a loving parent, crate training has a ton of value, and the crate itself doesn't have a negative connotation, or it shouldn't.
Yeah.
But if you make it look sad, you can probably make anything look sad.
Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing was just, we were talking about puppies and all the benefit and stuff of crate training there, which I totally agree with all of it, like the whole, the potty training, the crate training, chew training. But then we talk about dogs that maybe like those ASPCA dogs that already might have a certain set of issues and things that they need to work on. There's other benefits, a lot of which I talked about like in a blog post that I did a couple of years back that's on my website that was, like you said, people kind of personify the dogs, which I guess they did for a commercial, but in real life, they do it a lot, and it doesn't necessarily benefit the dog. And I think of dogs like, I've had a couple clients, and I know you have too, that let's say their dog has so much separation anxiety that they bust out of a glass window of the house, or they,
true.
you know, I think of Brent and I trained a dog named Taco. Shout out to Ronnie and Doug.
What's that?
Who was so anxious that she would not only bend her way out of the crate, but then eat her way out of the room of their new house, and then like sometimes get out. And even if she didn't get out of the house, chewing on all kinds of drywall and stuff can't be good for the dogs. And you know, there's
not at all.
There's just so much opportunity there from a trainer's perspective when dealing with a client to help them understand it doesn't do the dog any good to over personify them. I know they're your babies and everything, but they are not like actual babies. They're dogs, and they need things that dogs need. And it's your job as an owner to set your own emotions aside in order to give them what they actually need from you. That's what a good parent does.
Right. 100%. Now, it's my opinion, and Mariano may disagree with this. It's always my opinion that there are certain types of dogs and client combinations that we could recommend. You know, the crate may or may not be the most viable option for them, right? And the reason I say the dog and client combination is sometimes there's been situations in my career where I've recommended a crate, and I've also tried to sell a client on it. And that particular client, the way that they are and the way that the dog is, trying to force a crate, an actual like cage crate or like even a plastic crate, might actually make us go backwards in training, because there's so much opposition and so much fight. And, you know, unless I live there with the dog, like me as a trainer, I know I can train a dog in a crate within a couple days, right? However, when I'm teaching people to do it on their own, sometimes I feel I have to start with maybe a plan B or a plan C, which is just isolation in general, right? So there might be some situations where I teach people, okay, put a baby gate in your kitchen, and that's your dog's quote unquote crate or den, right? Or is there a baby gate in your laundry room? That's your dog's crate or den. Sometimes the guest bathroom, sometimes a puppy pen might suffice. The idea here is once I get the dogs or the owners on board with this idea of isolation, and they actually see that the dog can survive isolation, right? Not whining, not barking, not crying, and actually somewhat enjoys it, then I find a window opens up later where I can actually recommend the crate for certain activities like chew training or teaching an anxious dog to relax better, so there's so many other windows that might open up. Again, just a different approach. It's not necessarily the majority that I do this with, but for those clients where there's just lots and lots of friction, sometimes we got to get them to get on board with this idea of isolation first. Once we have that, then we teach them the context in which they could use a crate. That's just my approach personally.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think my only caveat to that, which isn't even like a disagreement, it's just a like, keep this in mind, is I had a couple clients. I'm actually finding there's a ton of Carolina dogs out here in Arizona. And I don't know if that's, and for people who don't know, a Carolina dog is a certain breed of dog that kind of like, it falls into a weird category, kind of like Basenji, kind of like dogs that, I mean, obviously they're dogs, a dingo that have spent so much time undomesticated that they're like quite different from other dogs. There's something that's observable. That's something that people have written about with these like particular breeds. And I had two Carolina dogs recently. One was a board and train, one was a private lesson client. And both of the dogs had a real tough time in the crate. And one of them, the private lesson client, the owner wanted to start using the laundry room, which I was prepared to not have a problem with until I saw the laundry room. And I realized, like, for whatever reason, the water heater is also in there. And there's like a sink and a window and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh.
He can't get out.
Yeah, because this dog, he was crating him, by the way, but the dog was bending his way out of the crate, jumping over the X pen that was around the crate, and then doing stupid things. Like the dog, for whatever reason, had like a fetish for eating literal cactuses that my client had, like actual small cactuses in a pot, and he would eat the whole thing. And like 2 or 3 surgeries later, it looks into training. So I was like, okay, man, look, this is what I would do. I wouldn't use the laundry room only because I'm afraid the dog's going to get out or chew on like a really hot copper pipe or something, spill some freaking steam in his face, So instead, I got him to buy himself one of those like tubular steel, like 70-pound crates.
Those tiger crates.
Yeah, those tiger. I have one for Zeus too. And, and he did a lot better because what I have noticed, actually, and this is a previous dog, but I'll stick to this current dog. What I have noticed is dogs that have issues relaxing in the crate, who like grab the crate with their mouth and kind of pull it inside in order to bend it and get out. Mm-hmm. When they try that with the heavy duty crate and they realize it ain't moving, real quick, they actually let it go.
Yeah.
I think it's because they're discouraged because the crate ain't going anywhere.
Exactly. Like, they can't manipulate it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they don't even like bother it to that same extent. Oh, and by the way, the Carolina dog that I board and trained, I recommended the exact same crate because the dog had the exact same issue. Mm-hmm. He bent one of my crates like to hell. And, and I was like, yeah, man, for his own safety, you should really consider one of these. And I explained that whole thing because, of course, the owner was nervous about crating him for that exact reason, which is why they never crated him, because they tried when the puppy was young and he was already bending out like at 5-6 months old.
Right.
But yeah, man, I just wanted to throw that out there as a little caveat of like, I totally agree that it doesn't have to be a crate necessarily. Confinement work is very beneficial for training overall, especially with COVID. We've talked about that in the past because everybody's home all the time.
Right.
But if the dog is that much of a flight risk, get yourself a confined crate for the dog's own safety.
Right. 100%. I want to try and introduce this, and I want to see if this has any value for anybody. So when I was a younger trainer, one of my managers was guiding me through different types of customers, and different, and when you're learning things, I like to put things in profiles because it helps me kind of understand things a little bit better. And one thing I learned was 4 general types of profiles. I mean, I'm sure there's 5 or 6 or 7, but what I've noticed in my career is that certain clients fall into one of these 4, or sometimes are a combination of the 2, right? And one of the first ones that we run into is a client that we call the relator, right? This is a very compassionate, empathetic, emotional, loving client who wants the best for their dog, right? It's these types of clients that we tend to see a lot of pushback from crate training, right? Because anything that leads to the dog's discomfort or misery or perceived misery, this is what we're going to see a lot of pushback or lack of cooperation with clients. Then we have a client that we call the socializer. And the socializers have a tendency of being very experience oriented, meaning they want to make sure it's a good time. They want to make sure the dog's having fun or the dog's enjoying it, or that the dog is, that the dog is having a good experience, right? They're experience oriented, right? And then we have 2 more. We have what we call the thinker, where this is a person that doesn't do anything unless it logically makes sense to them. It needs to logically make sense, like bullet points. I need to kind of evaluate risk over reward, and it needs to make sense to me. And the way that we explain and teach things to that thinker, it needs to make logical sense. So they don't necessarily care about how much fun the dog's going to have. They care about what's my risk, what's my reward, and what's going to make sense. And then the last one that I was taught was something called the director. And this is an efficiency-based type person, a person who wants things done quick. They want things done efficiently. They want things done right away. And they want things done, unfortunately, sometimes at the best deal, right? And so even though we could say like clients sometimes have a little bit of both, there's one element of each of these profiles that kind of help guide my teaching with certain clients. So for example, we can also split this up into 2 categories. The socializer and the relator are kind of more the emotional clients. They're really feeling based and experience based. And then the other ones are more logical, and like results driven type clients. Okay. And so what I want to kind of explain to you, or explain to everybody, is I want to talk about how we approach different types of clients when it comes to crate training, because I think this could help some of you guys maybe find a different approach, or if you're able to kind of see these characteristics in clients, like how we can help them get on board. Because the reality of it is, we know crate training can help all 4 of these types of clients and help their dogs. However, how we get people on board, we really have to connect with what drives them inside. Okay, so let's go ahead and just do a couple of points, right? So if I was going to prompt Mariano, let's say we were dealing with this relator client, this emotional, loving, compassionate, empathetic type client. What are some points that you would help explain to them to help them get on board with at least the idea of crating?
Yeah, this is something that I've been dealing with again just in the past couple of days. And it's what I do a lot for relators, but also for other people, but I'll stick to relators for now, is I find it very effective to say what they aren't saying, but I know they're thinking.
Like the elephant in the room. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An example being this. I just had a board and train dog go home maybe a week ago, like 8-9 days ago. His name was Mac, and his mom is a real sweet person, and and had a hard time just kind of being firm with him in general. Okay, so the way that I would approach her with things would be like, I'm talking her through something, an exercise or another, and just based on her face, and she's real polite and real attentive, and she's just like listening to me, and she's a great client, and I would feel like, listen, I can see that this makes you uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I just open up and she's like, yeah, it's just blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, it's totally valid. I want to hear your concerns. I want to know where you're at. It's important that we're on the same page here. And I don't want you to feel embarrassed to feel this way. It's important that I know what you're thinking. So I'll call it out. And then that opens up the opportunity for them to air their side. And I'm like, yeah, I totally hear you. But when it comes to relators, my way to get them on board, to make it logically and emotionally make sense to them, is I tell them, because they're relators and they're feelers, I put them in the role where they feel like nurturing. I'm like, listen, this dog is, you're his mom. He needs you. He needs your guidance. He needs your help. He's stuck. He's whatever. He's nervous. He's like, depending on what the issues are with the dog. And this is how you can help him. And I understand that it's hard for you. I totally get that. And we can talk about that. But I need you to understand what he needs from you is this, and this. Mm-hmm. You're not bad mom because you create your dog. You are good mom because you're giving your dog what he needs and you're setting yourself aside to do it. In my book, that's a win. And they typically that will kind of ease them up a little bit, and from there, they at least jump on board enough to try it out for a bit, at which point the benefit starts kind of seeping through because, we'll get into it in the during, but crate training is not really something I do just on its own. Like it's typically in the context of otherwise overall training.
Right.
So the benefit starts to steamroll from everything else. And then once they see the benefit, then emotionally it makes even more sense because they're like, oh my God, my dog actually does enjoy this. This is actually good for him. Mm-hmm. I'm going to save you, buddy. And and their emotion kicks in, and they're like superhero time.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was actually so captivated by that explanation that I think it's for a young dog trainer who's learning. Remember, that's called the relator because you have to relate to them. They have to know. This is where that quote we mentioned earlier, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. They need to know that you are on their side and that you care about the overall better good of the situation, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what I would add on to that just a little bit, like everything you said, 100%. And I've actually seen you do that in person. And it's amazing how you can get someone, you can stay strong and you can really connect with someone's opinion and then just kind of help shift it over. So that's really awesome. Also, what I think I would want to do, it's my job as a professional to kind of educate them on what could go wrong in the future with the type of dog that we have. Because remember, if you love your dog, you don't want your dog to be a mama's boy. You don't want your dog to be insecure. You don't want your dog to be codependent. You don't want your dog, you want to have a happy, confident dog who can entertain himself when you're away, who doesn't have separation anxiety. So you want these things, don't you? Right? And so I would always kind of tell them what the long-term goal is downstream. So that way the feeling connects. It's not just about captivating them in that moment with relating to them, but it's also letting them know, trust me, I will hold your hand through this and I will help you through the dark times. But as soon as these people, as you said, see that the dog is liking it and the dog's enjoying it and the dog's not fighting it, all of a sudden they become lovers of crates. And I would say that this happens with e-collars and prong collars and choke chains and everything else as well. But yeah, as soon as they see the dog doesn't hate it, automatically we start seeing it.
Oh, dude, that's an excellent point. Yeah, absolutely. The long term, like the why, and that's kind of what I mean when it's like get them on board because it's good for the dog, and then you expand on that, and but absolutely that's a huge point to bring up. Trainers pay attention to that right there. Yeah, I mean, and two, like you talked about when it comes to other tools and stuff like that, people once they see the benefit, then they get it. a lot of times when the more like feeling type of person has a hard time with it, and I keep note of this. They air their grievance because you give them the opportunity to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And they, of course, express, the dog, he seems uncomfortable, he seems this, he seems that, or like when I crate him, he blah, 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 And I think it's worth mentioning, and shout out to Sean O'Shea, who kind of gave me this idea. If the dog is having this issue, that issue, because it's obviously not like, I've never met a dog who came for training just because he wasn't crate trained. Mm-hmm. Like if he was otherwise perfect, they wouldn't even care, right?
Yeah,
so in the overall view of the dog and their issues and so on, I would explain to people, like, you have to understand whatever negative association, whatever fear, whatever reactivity, that you're afraid of with the crate, that stuff is already there. It already exists. That's why you're here, or that's why I'm here, or that's why, and so it's important that you understand, because dogs can be lost sometimes. They can be stuck on the wrong thing. They can have the absolute wrong idea of what's going on. He thinks right now that he doesn't want to be in the crate. But it's your job to show him. And once they get going, that's what I mean by like dogs let up really easy because, dogs tend to do really well in the crate. They tend to enjoy their crates. They are den animals. They, it makes total sense for them. But it doesn't make sense for them in the context of like, but I have to protect mom, but I have to protect dad. But,
Right. Totally. I think that's a great point. Shout out to Sean O'Shea. What's up, man? All right, moving on to the Socializer. So again, for those of you guys who are following along, the Socializer is an experience-oriented type client. These are usually really fun clients, really funny. They care about their dog having a good time, right? Mm-hmm. They understand, the dog might whine. They might be able to brush that off, but these are the people who are oriented on, I want to make sure my dog has fun, has a good time. So what are some things that you think we could tell clients to help their dogs, quote unquote, have fun in the crate?
I tell them exactly that. I tell them, if you want to maximize your dog's fun, your dog's freedom for the rest of their life, mm-hmm. crate training is going to be a huge component to that. And that's another thing that I dove into in my blog post, which was, it's our job as professionals to look at the big picture.
Yeah.
So if your dog is whining in this moment, I get where it doesn't seem fun.
Yeah.
But I explain to them, understand this, so you work for, XYZ and you leave town sometimes for work and, you either board the dog or your neighbor watches the dog or whatever's going on. In any of those scenarios, solid crate training would make that dog's experience so much better when you're not home. If you ever travel with your dog to family's house and there's like kids and other dogs and whatever, crate training is going to make that experience so much better, so much safer, so much everything.
Right.
I go camping with my dogs, all of them, so I take crates. It makes them safe. I'm never worried that they're like going to get out of the tent or something like that, and it just opens up the dog's possibility. It seems like you're confining and limiting, but it's just to teach the dog a skill set mm-hmm. when they're good. Because again, in the overall context of training, mm-hmm. when they're good and they have this down pat with all of the benefit they're in,
right,
your dog's going to live such a huge life as compared to people who don't crate train their dogs because of the issues that can arise.
Right.
It's insane. So if you want your dog to have fun, put him in the crate. That's how I go about it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so, and the only thing I would add to that is, when we are teaching these types of people, what kind of good experiences could the dog have in the crate? Well, the crate's where the dog chews on his bones, man.
Right.
That's where the dog chills and takes naps. That's where the dog really learns to enjoy, just doing nothing, right? I mean, mm-hmm. there are certain puppies and certain dogs that don't know how to do nothing, right? And I think this idea of the crate can sometimes be a vacation. The crate can sometimes be a play area or a chew area or a hang area or just a chill area for the dog. What we've started to know through the years is like this approach with this type of client helps them kind of buy into it a little bit. Also really showing how much more free time the people will have, right? So when your dog's chilling and resting, the owner, the client can actually go take a shower, go to the store, go get to do all these things and have a life again. Right? Because again, they're experience-oriented people, not just for the dog, but they're also experience-oriented for themselves. So when I'm able to teach these types of people, crate training your dog will also free up time for you to allow you to do the things that you want to do. I see that I get more success getting people on board in this scenario, right?
I totally agree with you. And I think that an element that you kind of jogged my memory on with that is, you were talking about people who also appreciate just efficiency in general. Mm-hmm. And that really strikes me as something worth mentioning because I have clients who I mean, not only, and they're definitely more these type of people. It's not that they feel bad for the crate. It's just like, you know, how do you manage this, that, and the other thing when you have kids and you work and so on, right? So I would tell them it's so easy because whether it's a puppy or not, the puppy rules sort of apply to older dogs when it comes to crate training and the benefit. And what I mean by that is you dictate when the dog is excited, you dictate when the dog is relaxed, you dictate when the dog eats and drinks and sleeps. And so you can form a dog's routine around your own. An example being, I have a client right now. She's a nurse, so she works like long days, but like 4 or 5 days a week, or 4 days a week, 3 or 4, something like that. Dad works from home though, and the kids are currently home because of COVID.
Right.
And so we were talking about like the routine can be so easy. I know your day is hectic, but why don't we do this? Dog sleeps in the crate overnight. Get him up in the morning. Go throw him in his little potty area outside. Bring him in, feed him inside the crate while you get ready for work. Take him out one more time. You're gone. Text the kids, at this time to get him out. And it just makes stuff easy.
For sure.
And so, and it makes it efficient for her because she also has a life. She visits her friends. She works out. She does her whole thing. So when you know where the dog is, you're mitigating any risk. You're making sure that the dog, risk aside, isn't developing any bad habits, isn't doing anything they shouldn't be doing. And it's simple. I tell people all the time, kind of like when you're training a dog in general, like healing a dog versus just walking a dog while they're pulling you. It sounds like more work, but it's really not. Crate training a dog and keeping a routine is so effortless. And once you get rolling, it's like driving a car. You just don't have to think about all the moving parts anymore. And it's just easier than not doing it.
Right. Totally. And I think that you were kind of talking about some of the last two types of clients, the thinkers, the logic-based clients.
Right.
And you're talking about some of the directors, which are the more efficiency and results-based client, right?
Right.
I think there's always two sides. There's always a side in explaining crate training where we have to focus on how the dog's not going to hate it. That's number one. The second one is how it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for the family, and for the person, how it's going to open up time and how it's going to really help make things efficient, make sense. And we want people to see the step-by-step playbook of crate training so that they can see over the long term how eventually it's going to get them to that dog that they want several months from now. Right. And that's from a psychological standpoint, with our relators and our social clients, they are really focused on the state of mind and the emotional state of the dog. And the other ones, they want to make sure that they're doing things that are efficient and effective for their lifestyle. Right.
Correct.
Yeah. So
I guess the way that I would word it would just be for the more efficiency-based people, I want to make it so that they can actually see themselves doing it. I feel like that really increases the possibility of them actually sticking with it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like that. All right, guys. So now let's go ahead and dive into the during crate training. It's while people attempt crate training that we start seeing a couple obstacles might come our way, right? Some of them could be whining. That's probably the biggest one. Anxiety, right? If the dog has accidents in the crate, that's going to be a big one. What else? Also, if we see that dogs hate going in, right? If a dog shows an opposition, like if you try and guide the dog into the crate and the dog's like, no, don't put me in there. Usually these are going to be some of the main reasons why people don't want to actually continue with crate training, because they think they're doing something the dog doesn't like, right? And I remember being a kid, I didn't like taking a shower. I didn't like brushing my teeth. I didn't like eating my vegetables. But there are certain things that after you do them, after a while, you get habituated to them and you just kind of do them and they become normal, acceptable, and sometimes desirable habits, right? So let's go ahead. Any other ones that you could think of, Mariano?
No, I mean, you're basically hitting the nail on the head. I mean, other than the extreme stuff, dogs bending their way out, dogs eating things they shouldn't be doing, dogs breaking windows and hurting themselves.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things that you can expect that would be huge reasons as to why people don't, or huge reasons as to why people should.
Yeah, I think the breaking out of the crate is a really good good one. It's so funny because I've met dogs who escape out of the crate without opening the door.
Oh yeah.
And it's crazy, and the only way you can really find out how dogs are doing it is putting a video
on video.
Putting a video camera on them.
Is it just me, or do you find that normally they escape out of the bottom two slats where the crate pan comes out?
No, really?
Yeah, you never seen that?
Between the door and the bottom slat?
You know how like the way that the crates work, the metal folding crates is the pan has like that little latch in the beginning, in the front at the beginning, in the front of it that holds it in place.
Okay.
And if you take that off, then the pan just slides out.
Yeah.
I saw a video where it was a boxer, and he slid out of the like as if he was the crate pan, he slid out of that space. So he obviously like
He had to
opened
bend
it.
it. Yeah, he bent
But
it.
the thing is, it really didn't bend. Like it bent around him, but as soon as he was out, it falls right back into place.
Whoa.
So, and the owners were like, yeah, I recorded it because the crate looks normal when he's done. So they're like, how did you get out of there? You know?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've always seen through the corner seam. You know, they squeeze out of the corner. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyways, yeah, it's crazy. So these are things that happen. So like, during crate training, if we have clients that kind of do that, or like they tell us these stories, well, I guess what are some solutions? What are some solutions that we could do?
Yeah. Well, here are a couple solutions, and I would say in general, I know that this can't work for everybody. In fact, we just spoke with a couple friends from Ecuador who were having this issue and were asking us how to help. If a dog has like severe anxiety or something like that, a board and train might be best.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's a puppy, obviously we can talk about like privates, and really there's a lot of dogs. Private lessons are largely viable for like the majority of dogs, but I'm talking the extreme case.
Mm-hmm.
What we can do is we can really encourage people to look into a board and train program, or at the very least, we can do our best to help them understand, listen, I know that your dog, it has like a severe anxiety issue. That's already a given, crate or no crate. Mm-hmm. So really try to keep things in perspective when your dog is whining and or trying to paw at it or whatever the case.
Right.
This is an overall issue, and the answer is bigger than just crate your dog. This is going to take some training, some this, some that, and really help them understand that it's an overall thing.
Right. If we were going to talk about like how we deal with whining and anxiety in the crate, what are some troubleshooting tips that you would have?
Okay. So if we're talking about, I'm going to separate whining and anxiety. I'm going to separate whining as to like a puppy who doesn't know better. And I'm going to separate anxiety as to like a pretty high anxiety dog.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Sure.
So if you have a puppy who's whining, you could consider something as simple as, Brent taught me this neat little trick. You know, everybody knows like you get the Kong, you put peanut butter in the Kong, freeze it and all that. But peanut butter isn't always the best for the dog, and it can be fattening and it can be all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. Brent taught me this thing, which I thought was pretty cool. It was actually when I went with him to a client in LA. After I had moved. He gets the Kong, takes the dog's own kibble, puts it in a little bit of water for like 30 seconds, stuffs it inside the Kong before the kibbles have time to like expand. That way they expand inside the Kong, and then freeze the whole thing. And then the dog has an ice cream cone made of their own kibble. Mm-hmm. No peanut butter, no extra fattening stuff, no messing up their diet. But if a puppy's whining in there, you know, throw the Kong and all that in there. Of course, barring all the other options, making sure the puppy's gone potty and everything else.
Yeah.
And throw that in there, and maybe even toss a little blanket or something over the crate to make it nice and dark. And that puppy's going to chew on that thing, get himself full and mentally drained, and knock right out. It's a funny thing to see. It's like a baby with a pacifier. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So something as easy as that, or even if you don't do that, something as easy as covering the crate. There are a lot of really simple fixes. And again, this may sound super obvious, but do this though. Take the damn dog out before you before you do anything else.
Well,
like
yeah,
if you're gonna,
and that's something I was gonna say. It's like especially for puppies or even in general, just even rescue dogs, right? Exercising them before you put them in the crate, both mentally and physically. Right. You automatically have a better success rate. And we know this as dog trainers. However, a lot of owners, they're kind of just putting the dog in the crate when they're full of energy, when they're acting up. You know, there's all these reasons that dogs might whine or have anxiety in the crate that we just really need to make sure that the owners in the conditioning process, that they are doing it post mental and physical stimulation, right?
Well, let me say this. Let me put a little pressure on trainers.
Yeah.
Because I know that they know that. But like we talked about in previous episodes, sometimes they're not always comfortable telling that to the owner. The owner expects like a quick fix, and then two, as like quote unquote, balance trainers out there, the answer to everything is not always just correct the dog.
Right.
Yes, definitely I do correct dogs if they're whining and all that, if barring like young puppies and whatever. But also before you get to that level, or like before you move on to that step, rather, make sure that the other hierarchy of things is taken care of. If the dog hasn't gone potty in a couple hours, I'm not going to correct him. I'm going to take him outside. And chances are when I put him back, he's going to be quiet. You know, if you like have the time, I mean, obviously if the dog's whining like at midnight, I don't expect you to exercise your dog.
Mm-hmm.
But if you like have time, yeah, take him out, do a little something with him. It's amazing what a little 5-minute lesson will do.
Right.
You know, like I think of 10 minutes, 5-minute food work, you know, a little 2-3 minutes outside, throw them outside just to make sure they just work. So they're probably going to poop and pee.
Right.
Throw them in the crate and it's utter silence. It's great.
Yeah.
Again, throw a blanket over it, stuff like that. But yeah, if it's like late at night and the dog is otherwise taken care of, they've gone potty, they are older, they're otherwise trained and understand like what they're doing is being pushy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with giving a little correction, you know?
Right.
So to get back into what you were asking me about, like an anxious dog, that's a different story.
Okay.
Right. So that's a dog that's got a set of issues that goes beyond just crate training.
Right.
So that dog, you have to be very careful and meticulous about how you approach that dog, because I don't want him to freak out. I don't want to create a negative association with anything, you know, with a corrective tool, with the crate itself, with me as a person, with, you know, so if I had a dog in a crate, let's say I have a high anxiety dog who's going to train with me and he got here like day one.
Mm-hmm.
What I've done in the past is, in that case, if it's like that new, even if it's late at night, honestly, I'll just get them out and try to work with them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's say we're like day 7 and the dog's got a little bit of training under their chops, like crate aside, just obedience.
Mm-hmm.
What I've done is put a tie out, like an actual metal tie out on the dog's collar as a leash, like a regular leash, only he can't chew through it because they try.
Right.
And if I'm going to start working obedience inside the crate, which I would hugely encourage people to do when working with anxious dogs, like asking for sits and downs from inside the crate,
Mm-hmm.
I start doing that. And if the dog's stuck, let's say, like don't know what to do, like if I put a little leash pressure or e-collar pressure or something, and the dog's just frozen because they're anxious in the crate,
Mm-hmm.
I find that pulling on the tie out, leash pressure helps them like find the down position.
Right.
At which point all the different pressures go away and so on.
Right. And would you do foundational work outside the crate before putting them in?
Oh, 100%. Like, yeah, like teaching them to go in and out, you mean?
Or leash pressure in general, right?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I crate them from the beginning, like just because we're talking overnight and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like jump on top of them. Like I don't go about correcting them for being bad
Right.
until I'm confident that they know the other way.
Right.
You know, and I think that that's worth mentioning because we've had our gripes with, you know, like the quote unquote balance training world before, where it's like, listen, man, I obviously believe in e-collars. I obviously believe in other training methods and the power of a proper correction.
Mm.
But you can't just slam away at a dog for doing any little thing that you might find annoying or whatever the case is.
Right.
Trust me, it can be annoying when an anxious dog is
Right.
whining and trying to get their way out of a crate and it's like 3 a.m.
Right.
and you have a client at 6,
Right.
you know? So
Right.
you just kind of got to keep your cool and do what you got to do. You run through the checklist. Like, all right, he's being extra bad. I'm going to get him out, make sure he doesn't have to pee.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll work him a little bit. Like, even though it's 3 a.m.
Right.
and my girlfriend's mad at me because I got up and got her up and, you know, but yeah, I mean, I don't really start putting much pressure on a dog in the crate until they're absolutely solid with that same pressure outside of the crate.
Right on. I want to kind of add to this a little bit and kind of approach it from a little bit different angle because, you know, if you guys go on YouTube, you know, or read any books, you know, I think the crate training, how to deal with whining and crate training, there are certain things that aren't talked about often in crate
Mm-hmm.
training. And, you know, when I was a younger dog trainer, I was taught, you know, if the dog's barking or whining, you give them a correction. Just correct them for barking or whining. And what I've realized is, yeah, it does work a high percentage of the time if you give the dog a correction, be it on an e-collar or through a training collar through the crate. Sometimes like slapping the side of the crate to just kind of startle the dog and snap them out of the tantrum. Those things do work, and there's scientific reasons why they do work. However, what I've realized is I've also seen trainers take it overboard where every whimper or exhale that the dog makes is they correct that, right? It's like they're kind of almost trying to subdue the anxiety or the whining from right away, right? And so I want to kind of give trainers a tool that I've just kind of developed in my head over the last couple of years. And it's what I call capping a tantrum or capping anxiety, right? And so it kind of works like this, right? So we all know that if you put a puppy in a crate, ideally in a perfect setup, I tire the dog out, I give the dog a chewable distraction, and the dog just kind of pacifies and chews himself to sleep. This is a perfect scenario with a puppy or a rescue dog. However, if the dog is overly attached, codependent, has separation anxiety, all these things, what we start seeing is if we isolate the dog in a crate, we're going to see whimpering turn into grumbles like turn into barks, turn into physical tantrums in the crate. And this could manifest itself. The dog's spinning around. The dog is pushing against the crate. The dog is biting the wires of the crate and the door, right? And we start seeing this tantrum starts escalating from nothing all the way to the dog. You know, if we were to put words to it, he's like, get me the fuck out of here, right? And we can kind of see this tantrum can escalate. And unfortunately, sometimes if you go online, some of the things that our clients hear is like, do I just let them like cry it out and figure it out? And the answer is, fuck no. You do not. You do not let the dog throw a level 10 tantrum and it's hope that eventually they get tired and snap out of it. So it's in these moments, and I want to be very, very clear with dog trainers, when your dog takes a tantrum to a physical level, this is when corrections really are helpful. Because this is where dogs can break their teeth, they can cut their paws on the crate, they can break nails, they can squeeze themselves through the bars and get stuck. It's in these moments where we see puppies can hurt themselves and rescue dogs can hurt themselves. So this is now where corrections come into play to let the dog know that's not going to go any further, okay? But I want to explain kind of this schematic as a tool, so hopefully this helps provide value for you guys teaching your own clients, okay? So what I like to do is I like to take the dog's reactions and I like to put them on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, okay? And let's say level 1 is damn near the dog's asleep. 0 is obviously the dog's passed out and sleeping, which is exactly what we want. And level 10 is the dog is pushing and prying the bars open and trying to bite his way through the crate. That's what a level 10 is, okay? What we want to do is we want to see where the dog goes consistently. So if I see that the dog escalates within 2 minutes from a level 1 to like a level 5 or 6, which is the dog whining, barking, whimpering at a very high volume, right? What we have to do is we have to choose where on that scale do we apply a correction, right? So obviously if I have a dog who, let's say, takes it all the way to the physical tantrum, the dog's freaking out, he starts grabbing the bars, right? If I have an e-collar on that dog, I only give the dog a correction when he tries to grab the bars. Only, that's the only time. If I have a training collar on that dog and a leash tied all the way through the collar to the crate, I only give the dog a correction when he tries to bite the bars. That's it. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm interrupting the tantrum that he's throwing that might hurt himself. I'm saying you can whine, but you can't bite those bars. Sorry, buddy, you can't do it. Now, what ends up happening, the dog finds this kind of shocking. He goes, well, what do you mean I can't bite the bars? And he might try and bite the bars again. And you just keep capping that tantrum. You're not letting them escalate past that level 8 tantrum or that level 7 tantrum, right? And so when the dogs start physically trying to hurt themselves, we have to stop it. Now, what we start seeing is if we consistently cap at a level 8 over and over and over, well, the dog can't go to level 9 or 10 anymore. And what you start seeing is they start escalating to level 7, level 6, level 5. Right? Now, what you might see is the dog now is no longer physically trying to throw a tantrum, but he's still verbally, rah, 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 right? Freaking out. So now what we can do is we can apply a correction for the highest form of verbal tantrum and barking. Okay. And if you follow this, if you control the highest form of physical tantrum, and then you control the highest form of verbal tantrum, what we're starting to do is little by little, we're teaching a step down process for the dog. And eventually, because we keep capping a ceiling on this tantrum scale, automatically the dog starts relaxing and kind of calming down and self-soothing because he knows he can't escalate. Okay.
Right.
Now, this all falls under something that I was taught, which is called sensory grounding, right? When the dog is we've all seen in movies, like a long time ago, someone's acting hysterical in a movie, and what the person does is they slap them across the face and they go, "Get a hold of yourself, man." And then all of a sudden the person comes to and is like, "Oh, what happened? oh, I was sorry, I was upset, I didn't understand. What happens is when the brain starts getting in this fight or flight state, the only way we can snap them out of it is sometimes bringing them back to their sensory. And so if that means giving them a correction, all of a sudden they go, what happened to my neck? Then all of a sudden the dog's anxiety just calms down. And this is why corrections work in dog training, right?
Yeah, in general.
Right? If my dog's barking at the other dog, I give him a correction and he stops. Well, because I'm interrupting that fight or flight mechanism where the dog goes, oh, okay, I guess I'm not as anxious anymore right now. Okay. So this is something that people don't talk about a lot on the internet, and you don't see videos on it, and you don't see people, because it's very easy to get out of hand. Right.
Well, it's also very easy to take out of context because it's online. And I think I want to take that one step further and say the reason why this works, the reason why sensory grounding works, at least in human beings, and like the way that you've kind of formulated that in your head, like the whole capping versus like chasing, which absolutely I agree with. Here's something else that I've kind of formulated in my head that I apply to dogs. I didn't invent this wheel. It's a human concept that I've applied to dogs. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. So like, why then, other than disrupting that thought process, disrupting that moment of panic, why else does full-on dog training work to help dogs relax in the crate? And what I mean is this. I absolutely agree with you. That was an earlier point you made too about like, don't kill yourself trying to correct every little thing. It's just not worth it. It's not fair really to the dog. If the dog's anxious in the crate, you have to be understanding to a degree. Like, yeah, we can talk about that. I get it. I'm sorry. Like, look, man, as long as you don't really freak out, all right, whine out a little bit. Okay, fine. Maybe over time you can start knocking it down. I agree with that too.
Yeah.
Like you start with the big stuff and then walk backwards from there 100%.
Yeah.
But my big thing is training. Other than just correcting the dog, work on actual commands in there. And here's why. In cognitive behavioral therapy, the way that it goes is you have your thoughts and your feelings and your actions, and you think of like this triangle, and you can be influenced by any two of these three things at once, but one of them is dominating the other one. Mm-hmm. So for example, let's say your thoughts are dominating your feelings. An example of that would be, I think I've mentioned this before, but it's like, I hate traffic. Mm-hmm. So I have my motorcycle. In LA, I would lane split, and parking and all that was a breeze. And before I got my bike, I would be sitting in traffic in my truck, just pissed for no reason. It's obviously illogical, but my thoughts were being overrun by my feelings. So I'm thinking mean things. I'm like getting upset.
Yeah.
So, but I got my bike, so I don't deal with that anymore. I lane split. It's all good. No more traffic. I'm home quick. But for whatever dumb reason, I would get home and like make myself upset. After avoiding all this traffic, I would still get home and watch videos of like things that would make me mad, like car crashing into a biker, like something that would piss me off as a motorcycle rider, which makes no sense. And I totally understand that it was a stupid thing to do,
right.
But that's where my head was at the time. And then the inverse of that, when I was learning about cognitive behavioral therapy, was instead of letting your like thoughts kind of drag your feelings into a negative place, why don't you drag them into a positive place? How about you get home being annoyed about traffic and go for a run, make yourself feel better. But the point of that was thoughts, feelings, actions, what you do or what you think can influence how you feel. And so since you can't necessarily always like directly just influence a dog's feelings, like, hey, you be calm. Mm-hmm. What you can do is influence what they do.
Yeah.
So, and so if a dog is in there whining it out and panting and like you said, trying to bend their way out, hurting themselves, what I can do is, hey, nope, down.
Yeah.
And so that dog their tantrum is interrupted because I've still given that correction.
Right.
But also I'm like, what you need to do is lay down and stop moving. And I know you know how to do that. Mm-hmm. You can be nervous. They may still be in the down position, mm-hmm. but you're going to be down.
Right.
And from there, you start creating some sort of grounding to where the dog knows like, oh, whoops, let me lay down right here. And so because of that, it's really hard for the brain, for the thoughts and the feelings to keep running at 1,000 miles an hour when the physical element is like 12 or 13 because they're just chilling, laying still.
Yeah.
And so naturally, the body finds that balance and they come to a happy medium, which is why cognitive behavioral therapy works in human beings. And that's kind of how I approach it with dogs. That's why I say actual obedience in the crate is hugely important. Don't just correct the dog, correct them and then direct them. Like no, down, no, give them a command.
Right. 100%. And I would say for dogs who are extremely anxious, who have that type of, I think obedience foundation is probably the most effective and efficient way to get that dog used to the crate. When we're dealing with puppies who don't necessarily have very strong conditioned, opposition to the crate, something as simple as just capping the tantrums can be really, really helpful. Now, again, in a perfect world, we exercise the dog and we put him in the crate with a tasty chew toy. But what I've noticed, and you guys might have noticed this as well, sometimes the dog doesn't give a shit about that chew toy if they're throwing a tantrum. Right. And I've had clients that they go, I put his tastiest bone in there. I put his favorite toy in there. He doesn't give two shits. All he's doing is whining and looking at me with puppy eyes. And so what we can start doing is whatever the extreme emotional tantrum or physical tantrum that the dog is throwing, we can put a cap on it. And what we start seeing is as the dog relaxes, literally, I've had clients in 45 seconds, they say, hey, cut it out. They clap their hands, or they give the dog a correction, or they tap the side of the crate. The dog goes, oh, sorry. Okay, I'll snap out of it. And then they go start chewing their bone, right? Mm-hmm. So this isn't necessarily a method that you have to use every time the dog's in the crate. But if you do it once, twice, 3 times, you're going to see that your dog learns to relax and your dog actually learns to decompress naturally because they understand that the tantrum doesn't happen in crates.
Absolutely. Period. And I think that the thing that we really want people to take away from this is the dogs are smart. Dogs evolve. Dogs are great. That's one of the best things about them is just how flexible they are. Mm-hmm. And when they understand that the absolute extreme end of a tantrum is just not an option, they look for another way. Mm-hmm. That's how this all works, right? You take away a behavior and you replace it with something else. You give a chew toy, you give a command, you give them something to latch onto, because I have seen people correct dogs and offer nothing in return. And so the dog's just still there stuck. Like maybe now they're afraid to touch the crate. And, we talked about learned helplessness and all that in the past and why that's bad. And, the dog is sitting there still panting, still drooling up a storm. And I'm like, man, you should really do more. I'm not against correcting the dog for being bad, but give something with it, so you're absolutely right. Like you were talking about, and I just want to make sure people keep that in mind.
Right.
Don't go nuts with correcting each and every little thing. Cap things where it's appropriate and realistic to do so. Yep. Walk your way down so that the dog gets calmer over time, but give them something, a command, a chew toy, something as easy as any of those things. Also, again, like I would say my fourth and final tip before you start cracking down puppy or like high anxiety older dog, run through the basic checklist first. Take them outside to go potty, maybe get them a little drink of water, like do the simple stuff.
Exercise them.
Exercise them if it's realistic, because again, if it's like the middle of the night or whatever, at least get them out to go potty. You know what I mean? So, and if it's realistic, exercise them. If they're excitable, do some stuff with them, Right. But if not, like just make sure that everything else is taken care of and that the puppy's not trying to do the right thing by warning you, like, Mom, I gotta go.
Yeah.
And then if that's the case, then you start stepping up with your corrections and make sure that your training around corrections and around the crate are on par. Mm-hmm. And I think that you'll be along in a way, you'll be on the road to success at that point.
Right. And also remember, we're not correcting the dog for being in the crate. We're correcting the dog for behavior that is happening while he's in the crate.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're not trying to make it a negative. Okay, cool. So hopefully, so that's the biggest obstacle. That's why we spent 15 minutes explaining that, guys. If you guys have any questions about it, please reach out to us. If it makes sense to you, then just again, try that capping the tantrum approach. I think that'll be very, very helpful because it has very quick results right away. Okay. Mariano, let me ask you this question. Have you ever met a dog that on purpose poops and pees in the crate just because that you'll take them out?
Yes.
Yep. Totally have. Totally have. So now sometimes the majority of accidents are happening simply because we missed a window, right?
Correct.
And so we kind of know what those solutions are. The person didn't confirm that the dog pooped and peed. Maybe the person doesn't have an idea of when the dog has to poop and pee. A majority of accidents in the crate are actually pee accidents, which means the dog's drinking too much water. So we have these really simple solutions to this problem. But on every so often, there is a dog who learns, I'm not going to go outside, and then I'm going to poop in my crate, and then I'm going to go back in the crate, right? I'm going to poop in the crate, and you're going to take me out of the crate. And that's just how this works. Right. And so my little recommendation for that is if we see that this is the case and the dog is holding it what I'll do is I'll usually walk and work that dog until I know that they have to poop to make sure that they go in the crate. Because here's the thing, there's always going to be an argument amongst trainers, whether the dog is doing it on purpose or the dog is doing it it's just a coincidence, right? Either way, the solution would be kind of the same. However, I truly feel I've met dogs who know I'm going to pee in here, you're going to take me out. I'm going to pee in here, you're going to take me out. Now, how that gets developed, there's a bunch of different ways that we don't have enough time to talk about in this scenario. But is there any advice you give for dogs who have accidents in the crate? And remember, the context we're talking about is if the dogs are having accidents and this is what's deterring the owners from actually doing crate training,
right?
What are some tips? What's the checklist we want to go through to make sure that we can troubleshoot this?
Yeah, make sure they understand the owner, the importance of simple consistency. This, I think, is where a lot of people get stuck because we've talked about this before and it's kind of by the wayside, but it does tie in. So I'm just going to touch on it briefly and then get right back to the point.
Yeah.
Owners a lot of times have the habit of assuming what the trainer's going to say. And if their assumption isn't what they think they want to hear, they'll avoid it altogether. Mm-hmm. So an example being that's directly related to this. I know a dog, I'm thinking of like 3 dogs in particular. I know that they were doing it on purpose because each and every time they went in the crate was literally immediately after having just been out. Mm-hmm. Like I haven't even left the room yet from recrating them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they sit there and they like take a shit. And I'm like, okay. Mm-hmm. So, poor dog probably it sucks when they find out that I'm throwing them in another crate while I clean it. So like they're not even, and then stuff them back in the original crate, right. When it's clean. Mm-hmm. But when owners have a hard time, either because they're like grossed out by the poop or they just feel like the dog, even if they understand that the dog's doing it to be a brat, they feel like, why is the dog acting out? Does he not like his crate? Mm-hmm. I really help them understand, like, listen, are you afraid that I'm going to tell you to like correct the hell out of him? Because I'm not. Yeah. Yeah. Take him out, clean that shit up, and put him back in there, and there you go. Suck it, dog. Like you're gonna sit in the crate, and if anything, just make sure he goes next time. Right. Get him out for a little bit longer next time. Try that.
Exercise, move him around.
Yeah, exactly. And here's a different scenario. This dog was purposely pooping in the crate, but not out of spite. This was a dog who I was boarding in LA actually when I was living in Westlake, and I was doing some training with him before having boarded. And he was a Belgian Malinois, and he was so nervous about everything that the mom would walk him all the time. She's like, he refuses to poop and pee out and about.
Right.
But she had a backyard, so he would go in the backyard. I lived in an apartment, so I would walk him nonstop. He just wouldn't go, and then eventually, like 2 days later, he explodes in his crate, and I'm like, well, damn. So again, I got him out, clean him, so on. But what I did with him too was the same thing. I would walk him like nobody's business, trying to basically kickstart his body to where you have no choice. Like you're going to have to go, and eventually he went. He had like 2 accidents in the crate after cameling it for like days at a time, mind you, which I didn't want him to do, of course. But eventually he did start going outside. He let it go. He had no choice. Like if we're all right, fine, I'm going to take your ass for like a 5-mile run. Like you're going to go, and he finally goes, at which point we turn around and head home, and I crate him and because he was crated, I noticed, or because he had gone this time, rather, he wasn't like, he wasn't having to go really bad. His overall anxiety was a little lower and all that stuff too. But sometimes you got to give him that kickstart.
Yeah. Yeah. And also what I would add to that is I think anxiety, insecurity, or just over distraction, the dog being distracted, this is what prevents dogs sometimes from going to the bathroom. Right. Yep. Like I always remember being a kid at recess where like I'd play all day at recess. And then the bell would ring to go back to class. And then 5 minutes into being into class, I would ask the teacher if I could go to the bathroom. And she would yell at me all the time. I remember Miss Marquez at Parkside Elementary School in San Bernardino. Like I remember she's still teaching till this day, like 40 years. But I remember she used to like be so mad at me that I wouldn't go. And she'd be like, why didn't you go during recess? And I go, because I forgot. Right. And so I always have to have a little bit of compassion for some dogs who might be pooping in the crate because that was me, man. And so a couple things that I would recommend for trainers troubleshooting this problem. Sometimes the walk, in my experience, can sometimes help trigger like the dog's bowel movements, but also sometimes the distractions that come across on the walk prevent the dog from feeling comfortable to go, or that are grounded enough to actually let loose, right? And so sometimes what I like to do is I'll do a lot of exercise and then I'll hang out in one spot for a long period of time, a place that's really low, like very quiet, not lots of distractions. And I will give the dog that opportunity. And sometimes I've waited 20 minutes, 30 minutes, because I know that dog has to go around this window of the day. And I know if I put that dog in the crate, oh man, he's probably going to try and go as soon as he quote unquote feels comfortable.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that's also the same thing that happens when dogs poop in the house, right? So we might have to see that. So we all know some of the simple solutions for accidents: clean it up, put them back in. There's other things that we mentioned right in the beginning of this segment. But this is when it gets really difficult, really tough. If you have those dogs who you feel are doing it on purpose, this is what me and Mariano recommend.
See, and that's exactly why I make it a point to say, and I've been saying it, and I don't mean to beat the dead horse, but I just, because you highlight exactly why, I'm going to say it one more time. Mm-hmm. Crate training matters with overall training, with an overall obedience program. And for a reason just like that, if the dog is overall distracted, they could be a puppy or a high anxiety dog, whatever the reason, they don't want to go outside. Including these dogs I was telling you about, I was trying to offset for that by leaving them outside for a very long time, mm-hmm. and like without the other dogs. And, so like I was even systematically like, all right, I'm going to put him with other dogs for like 10 minutes to let him play and he has to go. Then I'm going to put them all away, but not him, so that now he's not playing and see if he goes. But in any case, if the dog's too distracted, if the dog's too nervous, if the dog's too whatever, in all of those circumstances, having a strong foundation in obedience will help you. You can pull the dog off of the distraction. You can keep the dog focused and otherwise somewhat calm.
Grounded, yeah.
And grounded under duress. And so that's why I just cannot stress it enough. Training, overall training, don't just crate your dog. And when you talked earlier about you don't want the crate itself to become a negative connotation, that's also why I ask for obedience within the crate. It's not being in here that's bad. It's when you're not in laying down. It's when you're not like whatever. So I'm compartmentalizing. You can be in there. You can do whatever. Like, oh, that's fine. But when you go here, the response to that is go there instead. Bark, 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 bark. No, down. And they go, oh, you're right. Sorry, down. And, and so they start to learn things. And it cuts to the point to where I like social pressure them even on accident. I'll walk in the room and they go, oh, look. And they like lay down in the crate. And I'm like, there you go. Like, just relax, chill out, lay down. And so I want them to start conditioning themselves into good habits, because when we talk about avoiding escalation, I avoid that escalation from the jump if the dog doesn't even get up. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
No, I agree. Let me ask you this question, because I think this is something. Does it have to be a crate?
No.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it doesn't always have to be a crate that we're using, and I think sometimes crates are the easiest. Sometimes crates are collapsible. Sometimes crates are certain things. But when we kind of look at the big picture of just shifting and changing behavior, any form of isolation has potential of working just as great. However, the crate is probably the option that limits the dog's mobility enough to be able to learn to relax quicker, right? So I would say if a dog has like a bigger room, well, that's more room for him to figure out how to escape. Or there's more things in that room for the dog to, have a tantrum and destroy, right? Versus if a dog's in a crate, it's just more of an isolated area that doesn't kind of lend itself to potential, bad expressions of stress.
Right, shenanigans.
Shenanigans. That's the word. Now, we obviously all know the concept of den animals, right? What denning is, right? So one thing I always like to talk to my clients about is that dens are like your room, right? And so like think of our bedrooms when we were kids. That's where we kept our toys. That's where we took a nap or went to sleep. That's where we would go to focus on things. Like I would be sent to my room to do my homework all the time. And sometimes we would just send our dogs to their room to chew on their bones and quote unquote, that's their homework, right? Your homework right now in this training protocol is to nap or chew on your bone or to relax or, whatever it is. But that crate in and of itself kind of becomes very reminiscent of our bedrooms as kids. Now I lived in a family where we didn't eat at the dinner table. So I would always eat in my room also. So that's just one extra parallel that I've drawn to my room. But yeah, so that's crate That's during
Dude.
the crate. Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, you're saying that as McKenna has some like delicious looking chicken right here to my left, and I'm like, oh, but eat in my room. No, but I will add this caveat to it though. Like, absolutely, it does not have to be a crate. I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that even if the dog isn't in a crate, like at home, I still think crate training is a valuable skill set for like if you travel, if you're in a hotel, if for whatever,
Right.
if XYZ, whatever excuse. I think crate training is something that every dog should know. But no, when you're home and everything is normal and on the up and up, I think a laundry room, something like that, is totally viable. I have no problem with that at all.
Love that. All right, man. Well, let's get into, let's say we've been able to troubleshoot some issues. We've been able to talk, first of all, we've been able to talk some clients into understanding crates a little bit better and getting them on board. Second, during crate training, any issues that have been coming, we've been able to kind of troubleshoot, the biggest of which have been whining and anxiety or having accidents in the crate. And then we had one more on the list, which was just fear of entering the crate. That's easily done with some treat work. Making sure you feed the dog in the crate, making sure you give your dog bones in the crate, making sure your dog has a positive reason to enter the crate. That's pretty self-explanatory. Dog trainers definitely know those tactics. But let's jump into the after crate training has started, right? Like after we've gone through all the troubleshooting and actually we're finally getting kind of the ball rolling and we're in there. What are some points that you want to talk about, Mariano?
Well, the big thing that I want to talk about is the big thing we wanted to talk about with the aggressive dog episode, which was making sure that the owners keep up with the training.
Yeah.
Because dogs can make amazing progress, and then the owners, they felt bad in the beginning, they're going to feel bad in the end. The only difference is it's our job to give them the insight and the understanding as to why it's good for the dog.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's important as trainers that we really make sure to express like just how much progress, just how much calmer, how much better, how much safer, how much, your dog's going to be if you keep up with your crate and or confinement training, if it's like a laundry room or whatever the case.
Mm-hmm.
And, why it's important for the dog's development over time that you keep this consistent.
Right. And I think, the hardest hurdle is getting them to buy into it and getting them to survive the troubleshooting phase. That is the hardest hurdle. Once we get there, naturally, it's going to be pretty obvious for owners. My dog likes the crate. My dog relaxes in the crate. My dog actually goes into his crate on command once we've developed that, right? Now, once the owner starts seeing that the dogs enjoy it, now we're going to start seeing that they start seeing all of the benefits for their own lives. I know my dog's safe. I know my dog's not going to get into something. I know my dog's not going to poop in his crate. I know my dog, I'm going to buy myself more time throughout the day where I can do my own thing. My dog's not going to annoy me at this certain hour of the day with the Zoomy. There's all these different scenarios where the results will speak for themselves. But once we get past the getting them to buy into it, and once we get past the troubleshooting phase of the crating,
that, and once we get into seeing the real full benefit of the crate.
Yes.
So because everybody gets it like on a basic, okay, so my dog's put away, like I know he's not gonna like blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a big problem that trainers face is clients, I've seen this before. I've met a lot of dog trainers. I've been to a lot of kennels, and, trainers will explain something to a client and kind of go off on a tangent that's not beside the point. It's on point. It's just, it may not be their dog.
Mm-hmm.
And the owners kind of start to space out.
Mm-hmm.
They put a polite smile and they're like, oh, but they're like, my dog doesn't chew anyway. So like, whatever,
Yeah.
So when they see the real benefit as it applies to them, and I think of things like, if it's a puppy, you stop the tantrums, which not only means your puppy's not whining and driving you insane, but they're not chewing, they're not peeing, and they're also not chewing on things they should be chewing on, not peeing in the house, but they're also not going to develop like long-term an unhealthy, correct. But now I think of the other side. I think of high-risk dogs, aggressive dogs, whatever else. The crate is also just a great management tool in general. You will have people coming to the house and you're afraid that he's going to bite somebody, crate him.
Mm-hmm.
Put your collar on him, crate him, and put him in a down state like we talked about.
Yeah.
If they walk in the house and he gets up, no, down, and and jump on it.
Right.
It's something that can give you your freedom back.
Right.
If you're nervous about your dog, even if they're the sweetest dog in the world, but you've got your toddler crawling around and the dog is 120 pounds and step on him, you have your freedoms back. You start making it work for you in a way that I think like people get it in their head, but they don't really feel the full benefit of it until they've had time to soak it in.
Right. And I think that was a good point. When you have children, if you have a dog with aggression, How do we socialize them when groups of people come over? Like the crate, after it's developed, has so many benefits in just the overall training process, especially when we're dealing with behavior mod, for sure. It's really, really important. And I think anytime that we lay out a training plan for a client, it's really important for them to know how crucial the crate is for the longevity and the long-term success of that training system.
Absolutely. In fact, I think I found a way to phrase it, and it's in a question, but
Go ahead.
But let's make no mistake about this, okay? Mm-hmm. So you and I have talked about this before. Mm-hmm. The elements of dog training, right? The behavioral, the routine, the obedience, the socialization, and the, and it was the relationship. Sorry, I might be forgetting. Relationship development. Okay, I was right. So are there any one of those 5 segments of dog training that aren't directly influenced by solid crate training?
Not at all. Not at all. I would say this, like I always tell people to that point about relationship development. I always tell people, I said, the reason dog trainers can get dogs to develop a balanced relationship from the get-go with your dog is because anytime your dog is with the trainer, they are asking productive things and teaching productive lessons with the dog, right? So usually at a dog training facility, or if you guys do board and trains, that dog's not necessarily having the same freedoms as your own personal dog, right? That dog is only with you when you're teaching them, when you're structuring them. So it's easy for that dog to learn the ins and outs of that trainer and how to please them because they're not just casually, hanging out in the other room doing something that they shouldn't be doing, right? And so we don't necessarily, as trainers, we don't have to really tell dogs no that often. Right? We don't have to say, cut that out. Don't do that. Stop that, in the sense of like, they're not doing anything that really pisses us off. Now, obviously when we're changing behaviors, we modify, we cut that out, or we mark no or off, whatever. But in essence, the reason dog trainers, remember, we always talk about this in every episode. The biggest complaint we get as dog trainers is that the dog is always better when you're around, right? And the reason that is because we are able to control the dog's access to us and therefore create a better relationship with the dog. What our dogs associate us with structure and respect and love and playfulness because that's all we've shown them to be. And so when I have clients who have unhealthy relationships with their dogs, this is definitely part of post-training, fixing that relationship with them.
100%.
Yeah, I love it, man. All right, guys. Well, we want to thank everybody for checking out episode 25. We really hope that this episode was helpful for you guys. Guys, we want to ask you just one quick favor. Right now, while you guys are listening to this, please share this. Just share this. If you feel that this podcast has added value to you or you've learned something new, please share this with one other person. I don't care who it is. It could be your mom, your dad. It could be another trainer friend that you have. It could be a client that maybe you had trouble explaining this to, that you feel that they might take some really good value from this episode of the podcast. Just go ahead and share it, guys, because it really just help us help other people as much as we can, because, we really want to help as many dogs as we can get better. Guys, again, this is episode 25, dealing with clients and crate training. We do have a very, very special guest next week. You guys may have heard of him. He has the coolest dog training YouTube channel in the world, and he is also known as America's Canine Educator. If you guys haven't guessed who it is already, it is our boy Tommy Davis with Upstate Canine Academy in New York. Check out our episode next week. It's going to be a killer conversation with our friend Tommy Davis. And again, guys, if you guys want to go ahead and follow us at Dog Trainers Podcast on all of our major platforms. All right, guys, we really look forward to catching you guys in episode 26 with Tommy Davis. We'll see you guys then. Peace.